So welcome everybody to the first in a series of 3 webinars on the furloughed leader. I'm Tia Colajanni, founder and chair of WIHTL, an organization devoted to increasing diversity and inclusion across hospitality, travel and leisure. For those of you who don't follow us on social media, please do take the time to find us on LinkedIn and keep up with everything that we offer, all the support we offer to the hospitality, travel and leisure community, and keep current. We are absolutely excited to partner with 21 Leadership to offer this series of webinars. I'll say a few words about 21 Leadership and introduce Richard in a second. So 21 Leadership are a team of specialists and thought leaders who blend the best in leadership psychology, brain-friendly learning, neuroscience and high-performing teams to create powerful, impacting and unique developmental experiences. Besides the kind of a formal introduction, I have known Richard Nugent, who is the founder and managing director of 21 Leadership for 10 years, since my days at Merlin Entertainments. Richard has extensive experience in our sector, having delivered hundreds of, if not more, of developmental programs for our industry. We have over 100 people joining our webinar today from a variety of different brands. I was saying that before, we've got people, lots of people, a very high contingent of general manager, operations managers, from Hilton and Whitbread. We have people from McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Pizza Express, Green King, lots of people from motor hospitality, British Airways, Odeon Cinemas, Marston's, and so on. Hopefully I've mentioned Casual Dining Group, hopefully I've mentioned everybody. So welcome to all of you. We've got Joanna and Gina from the WIHTL team here supporting us. We will be monitoring your questions. And Richard, over to you. Take us through the session today. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I wish we were all together in a big room somewhere in maybe one of your wonderful venues. But it's great to have the opportunity to do this, and I'm really privileged to have so many people who've tuned in. And I think, as Tia said a little bit earlier, it just shows that something like this is so needed right now in such an incredible period of change. And I think even before I get into introducing the program and the sessions, I'd like to ask everyone a question. I'd like you all to imagine that you were able to access a formula or a set of principles or a set of tenets that meant whatever challenges you're facing right now, you could be absolutely sure that you're going to be perfectly okay. I want you to imagine that you've got access to a set of principles that means that no matter what changes you're facing right now, that you're able to survive and thrive during them, that you're able to perform during them, that you're able to recover from them and reset after them, and then maybe even plan for the next set of changes. And I hope as you're listening to that it makes you think, yeah, I'd really like that, because that's really what this first session is about. This first session is focused solely on you. And I'm really looking forward to the series of 3 sessions that we have, but they've been designed in a very specific way. So we've started with the focus on you first, because we know before we're able to lead others or lead our businesses or lead our organizations, we have to be resourced up enough ourselves. So we're focusing on you first. Then we're focusing on you and your teams in the second session and how you lead others. And then we're going to switch the focus a little bit on how you lead the business or lead your career or lead results in the final one. But there's a very specific reason why this one is all focused on you. And because of the industry that we're in, I also bet that you've spent the last few months really focused on other people. I know through all of the conversations that I've had with clients and people who we work with on an ongoing basis that there's been a real focus, even with some leaders who are furloughed themselves, they're still leading their teams who are furloughed, as well as supporting their families and taking care of, worries about monies and jobs, etc. So I'd really encourage you for this next 50 minutes or so to be really, really selfish. This is all about you and how you can be as resourced up as you possibly can be. So let me give you a little bit of context as to the position that we're coming from for today and also for the following session. So, and there's a bit of an irony to this story. In late summer of last year, myself and my team sat down and we decided to change how we operated a little bit, and we wanted to really focus on what seemed to be the biggest challenge for senior leaders and the kind of clients we worked with at that moment in time. And we started off on a very practical research project, and what we found was that the biggest challenge really surrounded what we now call unknown change. So there just seemed to be, at that point, in a lot of the organizations we're working with, and the organizations that we modeled, a lack of change capability. So people were facing challenges they'd never come across before. And I don't just mean growth, for example, but what happens if you're bought by a huge Chinese conglomerate and your strategy now is to double top line and bottom line in 5 years? People didn't have the capability to do that. Or lots of talk about technology. So we've got technologies coming down the line that won't just change how we do business, but potentially change our lives and the world. But we don't know in what ways, and we probably won't know in what ways until they actually arrive. So how do we operate in that kind of environment? So we started this research project, practical research project, where we modeled organizations. We've got the London School of Economics involved, and we've created this model that we slowly started to launch this year to help organizations to prepare for huge change. Little did we know how relevant it was going to be and what was going to hit. I wish we had known a year earlier and we would have done the work quicker and earlier. But the focus of this session comes out of that bit of research. And one of the crucial tenets in that is that we really started to understand more than ever that for an organization to be able to prepare for change and survive and thrive through it, perform during it and recover from it, there had to be a focus on building the individual's change capability within the organization. So I'm talking about something that goes beyond just well-being, as important as I think well-being as a topic in organizations is. This is about self-leadership. How do I, as an individual, lead myself through whatever changes come along? How do I make sure that I'm resourced up enough to deal with whatever's coming down the line? And out of that, we've got a couple of frameworks and philosophies and sets of practices that I'm going to share with you during the course of this session. And I think it's even more relevant than ever, not just because we're in the midst of a global pandemic. It's almost like, really sadly, I think it's almost become easy for us all to say, well, it's because of the pandemic, it's because of COVID. We know we're going through that. It feels like a bit of a blanket statement now. But what I think is happening in business today, maybe this is just the media that I'm seeing, but that there's a bit of a misperception about what's going on now. That we talk about people being furloughed, and I know some people, by the way, are some of you are furloughed now. Some of you aren't furloughed but are leading people who are, and this is relevant for all of you. And if you fall outside of those categories, this is about making sure you're resourced up enough during this change, so it's relevant to all of you. But there's this misperception that you've got some people who are furloughed and they're basically sitting around not doing very much and just going with the flow every day. You've got some people who are working from home who are finding it a bit of a challenge, and we're all waiting poised for the pause button to be pressed again, and we can all go back to work and restart. And we know we'll be really busy, but we're all really excited about it, and we're desperate to get back there. And that is true. We are desperate to get back to work, but I think we've got to accept, even those of us who are hoping that the new normal is really similar to the old normal, even if that's a bit optimistic, but we've got to realize when we go back, we're going to be faced with challenges we've never been faced before. We're going to be doing things potentially leaner than ever before. Some of you will be going back to different roles, sometimes with different organizations. So going back is going to be a challenge. The real misperception is that I know those of you who are furloughed are not sitting around doing nothing. I know you're homeschooling. I know you're supporting families, you're supporting colleagues. Some of you will be worried about the financial aspects or the career aspects. So again, I think it's even more important that we take this focus on ourselves, even if it's just for an hour now, and then for a short amount of time every day, which I'm going to share with you a little bit later how to do that, to make sure that we're as resourced up as possible now, so that when we do go back to work, we can hit the ground running. And for those of you who've been working your backsides off while other people are furloughed just to keep things going, you have to have the opportunity to resource yourself up so you can do that. Otherwise, we're going to have huge burnout in our industry when we need each other most. So that's really my focus and my context for this session. One other thing I want to say just before I get into the meat of it is, one of the things that I'm really proud that we're known for is we tend to create really different feel and learning experiences. We're not tree huggy or different, but we have a very different design process, and we have a neuroscientist that we consult with to make sure that we are the opposite of a kind of pour and snore, death by PowerPoint kind of organization when we run events and when we consult. Now, in this kind of environment where there is about 90 odd people on, nearly 100 people on, and lots to cover in a really short period of time, it's slightly more difficult to get that kind of interaction. But there's a couple of things I'd love you to do, to A, keep it interactive, but also to B, to make it easier for you to transfer the insights and the practices back into your context, whatever it is right now. So one thing is, just to let you know, there'll be a couple of times during this, I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to ask you to just write something down or put something in the chat, and I'll just leave a pause, and it might just be for 30 seconds or a minute. But sometimes people get uncomfortable with it in this context, and I'm just going to encourage you to be okay with that, because I'd rather you had the opportunity to write some things down, especially actions that you're going to take. And if that means we've just got to all pause for a minute or two, then that's okay. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to encourage you to use the chat in the Q&A, and I'll keep flicking on and off, and I know the others will as well, because I want to make sure I answer as many questions as you've got. I want to make this really genuinely, truly valuable. And there are times I'm going to specifically ask you some questions, and I'd love you to either answer them in the chat or the Q&A, or at least let me know that you're thinking about it. You know, if I ask you, are there any questions, and you haven't got one, type in, I'm all good, just so there's that degree of interaction between us, because I want to make sure it feels as two-way as possible, you know, in the context that we've got. Final thing is, if you're a prolific note taker, my encouragement is to dial that down a little bit just for this session, because you can go back and rewatch the recording. I'm much more interested in you taking actions and writing out your insights. What have you learned? What are you going to do with it? So, all that said, I'm going to get into the first part of this self-leadership, personal influence framework. And these were the first three insights that we came across when we were looking at how do people perform during significant change. And I guess in the first instance, I was a little bit surprised at how simple they are. So when I'm about to share them on the screen, you're going to see some things that are very familiar to you, but there is some subtlety and some nuance in it. And it's the small things that make the big difference. So in any organization who might be required to survive and thrive during change, then here are three things that we need to focus on to perform at our best and get our best from our people. And you should be able to see them on the screen here now. So as individuals, as human beings, we need a sense of certainty, and we need a sense of direction, and we need a sense of empowerment. Now, as I say, they may not be surprising to you, but here's what actually happens during change, and it's happening right now. We need a sense of certainty, we need a sense of direction, we need a sense of empowerment, and there isn't any. We don't know when we can fully be out of lockdown. We don't know when we're going back to work, most of us, if we aren't at work. We don't know when our colleagues are going to be back to work. We don't know when we're going to open. We don't know when our clients are going to be back, and if our clients are going to be back in enough time for us to then be able to serve them. So we don't know when our kids are going back to school. We've had the invitation. Our kids aren't going back if our school opens on the 1st of June. So all of these things are uncertain. We haven't got goals. We haven't got the usual kind of choices going on. And the important nuance, therefore, is in the first part of that sentence. It's we need to create for ourselves a sense of certainty, direction, empowerment in the absence of them being there in the world as we know it. We need to create a sense of it when it isn't there. And here's some ways that you can do it. And they're simple, but not everybody is doing them. So the first thing is, when we look at certainty, as soon as this hit, everybody was talking about we should have routines, build in routines, make sure you have a routine, set a timetable for your kids. We got our timetable through from our kids' school, I think about the 2nd or 3rd week of lockdown, and it was regimented. 5 to 9 in the morning or 20 past 3 in the afternoon. Here's everything they should be doing at the exact times. And I know it's really well-meaning, but for most of us, if we create too much routine at a time like this, it actually increases our stress rather than decreases it. So routines are really good as long as we understand that we get the sense of certainty from having the routine, not necessarily from following it to the second. I think the best analogy I've got for it is if you know how ships' anchors work, the routine that we have is like the anchor, but ships flex around the anchor and we need to flex around our routine. I found it interesting. Some of my friends have been talking about Joe Wicks and gone, actually, I'm a bit lost when Joe Wicks isn't on from 9 till 9:30 in the morning at a weekend. I go, oh, do you do Joe Wicks every single day? Oh, no, not every day. We do it every now and then. Doing Joe Wicks every morning isn't what gives us the certainty. Knowing Joe Wicks is there to do it if we want to is what gives us the sense of certainty. So routines are really important, but we need to be really flexible around them in order to look after ourselves, to resource ourselves up. It's a nuance, but it's a really important one. The important build on it, though, is that the beginning and end of every day tends to be really important when it comes to creating that sense of certainty. So if you're going to build some kind of routine to stick diligently to, I would recommend it's at the beginning and end of every day, and make them simple and make them easy to follow and easy to implement. So for example, I've got a routine that at 5 to 9 every day, so roughly at the start of my working day at the moment, I have a reminder that pops up that tells me to do some reflection. And I just reflect on a few simple things. I go through 3 good things that happened yesterday. And even if I've got to search for them on days that haven't been so good, I look for 3 good things, even if they're tiny things from yesterday. I then think of 3 things that I am generally grateful for. And again, they can be small things. It might have been dinner the night before, some time I had with one of my boys, but 3 things that I'm grateful for. And then I finish with an affirmation about the day ahead. So it's almost like a little mini vision for the day ahead. And that, it takes not even minutes, but that just sets me up for what I'm about to do. And it's my beginning of the day routine. And at the end of the day, me and my wife, no matter what's happened during the day, we take some time to sit down and almost debrief what's gone on. Because I'm sure the same as many of you, we're somewhat ships passing in the night at the moment, especially with some of the stuff that's gone on. We do that no matter what, no matter how late it is, no matter what's gone on, we sit down and we create that. Because that beginning and end of day routine creates that sense of certainty for us. Next up, sense of direction. So all of us, I think, everyone who I saw on the list to join in, we will be driven by goals and targets and visions. We've probably got incredible plans for our careers. And I'm a huge fan of all of those things. I'm a massive fan of things like 2-year future histories. But now actually isn't the time for those things, in my view. What we need to give us a sense of direction right now in these challenging times are much shorter term goals, much shorter term visions. And the more challenged you are, the more stressed you're feeling, the shorter I'd encourage your goals to be. We had we lost somebody really close to us around Easter, over the Easter weekend, and amongst everything else that was going on, one of our very best friends, really, really suddenly, our goals and our like visions, if you like, over the days and couple of weeks after that went down to hour blocks. It was between breakfast time and lunch time. What are we going to do in this period of time? Because we needed that sense of direction of what we were going to do, because we were feeling pretty listless, but we needed that sense of direction, but it needed to be short enough for us to be able to do it. Those of you who might have an interest in psychology will know this is holding. It's making sure that we have a sense of direction, but in a short enough period of time to make it effective. This is why things like exercise and learning is really important and really powerful at this point, because you can just set yourself a goal of going out and having a 10-minute walk later on today. That's a short enough term goal to give you some direction. And the third is empowerment. And this is perhaps the most challenging one right now, because we don't have many choices. We don't have anywhere near the amount of choices that we normally do. And as a human, I am a huge believer in choice being better than no choice. So when I coach, especially really senior people in organizations who are unhappy, the most common reason for unhappiness and stress is often they feel that they don't have choice. So any choice is better than no choice. So the thing to do now to resource yourself up is to focus on the choices that you're already making. So I hope everyone is been following the government's advice about staying at home and 2-meter rules and not mixing with other households and all of that stuff. But actually doing that is a choice. You could choose not to. I hope you're not. But knowing that we're making that choice creates a sense of empowerment. Remember, it's a sense of. Knowing that you're making these choices all across the day reinforces to yourself. It sends messages back to your brain to let you know that you do have a sense of empowerment. You have a choice to whether to do this or that. Even if you're unconsciously making those choices, sometimes it needs a pause to say, right, I am making these choices. I've got a sense of empowerment. And what it opens up is an awareness. When more choices are created for you, you'll start noticing those and you'll create a great sense of empowerment. So there's the fundamental starting point. That's the foundation on which we're going to go on to build what we call the critical 4. These things are things you need to be focusing on, in my view, every day, especially those of you who are challenged, those of you whose organizations are up in the air at the moment. So I'm going to flick onto the chat, see if there's any questions, but I'm going to leave 30 seconds. I want you to write down either one insight that you've had from that, a reminder that you've had, because it might be something you knew already but you've just forgotten to do, or one action that you're going to take. So I'm just going to leave that for 30 seconds, and I'm going to pop into the Q&A and just see if there's any in there before we move on to the next one. So 30 seconds. Thanks, Meredith, for letting us know there's no questions. That's great. Great stuff. Thanks, Angela. Small goals, definitely. Linda, writing down your reflections from the day. It's a perfect way to end the day, especially if it's been a good day. Make sure they're weighted towards the good things rather than the challenging things. It's lots of people talking about reflections. For those of you who are listening and you aren't a reflector, and you aren't the kind of person who do like gratitude stuff, believe me, neither am I. Like, I am not a reflective person. I'm much more action orientated. I'm much more future focused than the kind of person who looks back. It helps enormously at a time like this. It helps enormously at a time like this. Great stuff. Let me pop back to the screen share. So next up, I'm going to share with you a critical 4 for self-leadership. So on your screen, you can see the critical 4. What I'd like you to do first of all is quickly stick in the chat. If I was to ask you to define those 4, how many of them could you confidently give a definition for? I'm asking this because I think some of them are more familiar to people than others. So if I said, how many could you define out of those four? Just quickly stick in whether you think you could define one of them, two of them, three of them, four of them. Let me have a quick look. Great. So bit of a mix. So in some of these, I think will be, as I say, more familiar to people than others. And in particular, the first one, self-efficacy, has been probably my most important discovery this year. The importance of self-efficacy is my most important discovery this year. In particular, for example, in education, those of you who've got kids or have a particular interest in education, self-efficacy is actually the best predictor of the amount of progress a student will make through education. It's incredibly important, yet it wasn't something that I'd come across with any consistency in all of the psychology or neuroscience that I've studied over the last 15 or 20 years. So for us as individuals, I can't overstate the importance of us focusing on our fundamental belief that we can learn, we can grow, we can develop, and that we can overcome challenges. Self-efficacy is the fundamental belief that we can learn, we can grow, we can develop, and we can overcome challenges. So I just point back to that educational example for a moment. If let's say you have somebody who is, an academically bright child, but they believe it's, they just are. I'm just bright, I'm just clever, or I've got a God-given talent, for example. That's great, but the moment that they start to have a dip in performance, or they find a subject or a topic or a year in their educational journey where they struggle or their grades dip, they all of a sudden lose the resourcefulness to be able to deal with that. Because it wasn't them in the first place, it was this talent that they just had. Whereas you might have a child who's maybe not as academically high up the ratings at first, but if they have a fundamental belief that they can learn as long as they focus on something, or they ask the right questions, or if they just work really hard at it, they'll get better, which is a high self-efficacy, then they're more likely to be able to carry on developing. And similarly, if you've got some kids who just think they're not very bright, they're a bit stupid, it's really difficult for them to take that step up. Whereas if you've got a child who's not good at something, but they think, well, I could be if I wanted to, I just need to work hard at it and put some attention on it, then they will grow and develop. In the workplace, I think this is really important in times of change. So if you've got somebody who is just good at a job, they just fell into the right job and they just seem to be really talented at it, and that's it. When the world changes and the roles changes and the emphasis changes, it's really difficult for them to shift from that. Whereas if you've got somebody in your team, for example, or this is sounding familiar to you, where you know that you can turn your hand to pretty much anything, and with some attention and with some hard work and with some help from the outside and support, you can learn and you can grow and develop. That's a much healthier place to be in at a time like this. I was thinking from a diversity point of view, and this is my musings rather than anything I've got from a specific set of research. But if I think back to, again, to school ages, there's this really clear messages that girls are better, tend to do better at schools than boys. We hear this a lot. I've got 3 boys, 2 of them are at school. And quite often I'll say, oh yeah, they're not quite there, but everyone who's above them is a girl, and they just do better. I thought, well, that's an interesting way to set people up for the workplace. So if you've got, let's say, a top 3 in a class performance academically, and you've got two girls and a boy in there, what I hear with boys is you're doing really well because you're working really hard and you're paying attention to it. Girls, you're doing really well just because you're girls. And I'm not saying that's what I think, by the way. It's the kind of conversations that I hear. You then translate that into later life. It's created a lower sense of self-efficacy, because it's almost like those girls at school weren't being told you're doing really well because you're working really hard and you're paying attention to it. Therefore, that means you're really good at learning and you'll keep being able to. I think it's a less healthy frame than sometimes boys are given at school. And what that means as we get into the workplace, I'm not sure, but I think it's an interesting thing for us all to reflect on. How do we have a better quality of conversation rather than just saying, actually, you're good at this because of agenda and you're not good at that because of agenda. I think it's an interesting thing to reflect on. So self-efficacy, the fundamental belief that we can learn, we can grow, we can develop, and we can overcome challenges. By the way, after I share the other three, I'm going to give you some practical practices that you can go away to develop these and make sure they're lined up properly. So next, I'm going to move on to self-esteem. And again, self-esteem, I don't think is talked about a lot in the workplace in general. I was doing a similar session to this with a group of professional footballers last week. I do quite a lot of work with professional footballers. And it was interesting. I mentioned self-esteem and there was this kind of visceral discomfort. But I think it's really important to talk about, especially times like this. Self-esteem is the fundamental, the value that I place on myself, that I value myself enough to. I value myself enough to eat the right kind of things. I value myself enough to not self-medicate too much. I value myself enough to exercise and look after my body. I value myself enough to be in the right kind of relationships, whether they're personal or professional. I think those of you who've been involved in well-being type programs, I think this is often missed from the kind of exercise and health part of well-being, because we all know we should, move to burn off more calories than we put in. But I've got to value myself enough to do that first. So self-esteem is the fundamental, like the value that I have in myself, that I value myself enough to. Resilience is probably, I think, the best known out of these four, but I've got a challenge in what I see being positioned as resilience. Even in a lot of the well-being programs that I see being run in some of the clients that I work in, I still think there's a misperception in a lot of organizations and with a lot of individuals that resilience is about being stoic and facing into the storm and walking on regardless. And that is not what resilience is at all. Resilience is a fundamental knowledge that I can recover from challenges. Those of you who are old enough to know what weebles are, and if you've never heard of a weeble, it's an age thing, don't worry, you can look it up. But those of you who know what weebles are, you'll remember that weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. And I think that's a much better context for resilience. This fundamental belief that we'll wobble, but we won't fall down. And actually, and again, as we've learned over the last couple of weeks dealing with what we've been dealing with at home, sometimes actually resilience is falling down, not knowing how you're going to get up, but knowing that you will. Knowing that you'll get on with things somehow. And if you've got that fundamental belief that you can recover from challenges, you'll find a way. And finally, for now, confidence. So I've studied and taught about and written about confidence for 15 years now. There's a fundamental myth about confidence, which is that it's outside in, that confidence is something that we get when we've achieved certain things or when we have delivered certain things, we have a certain amount of money, we look a certain way. That confidence doesn't come from that. Confidence is an emotional state like any others. Confidence is something that we do rather than something that we get. Confidence is triggered by a combination of what we do physiologically, what we do inside our heads, and the kind of words and language that we use. And most of our lives, even those of you who might be thinking, I'm not really a very confident person, most of our lives, we operate in a state of natural confidence. If you go to open your door or, drive home when we're able to drive home, you don't have to go through some process to be confident enough to do that. We just are. And people who are fundamentally confident know how to access their natural state of confidence. In other words, they know what they do with their body. They know how they stand, move, and sit when they are feeling just naturally confident. They know the kind of conversation they have inside their heads when they're naturally confident. They know the kind of words and phrases they use on the outside when they're naturally confident. And they replicate those things at the moments when they are less confident. Now, I could do days just on confidence in itself, but I want you to understand a couple of the fundamentals. Confidence is something that you do or you don't do, not something that you've got or you haven't got. You spend more time in natural confidence than you realize. And all you need to do to be able to access that more of the time is to notice the kind of physiology, the kind of language and the kind of focus you have at those moments in time. So I'm going to pause for a second before I go on to sharing these 5 practices. What I'd like you to imagine is that you have a bit of a graphic equalizer of these critical 4. Some of them you might be listening to and thinking, actually, I think I'm okay with that. And there may be 1 or 2 that's a bit low, and you're going to need some practices just to notch those up at this moment in time. So you can either put a note in the chat and say, you know, here's the things that I think I'm okay with. Here's the couple I'm going to work on. You can make a note or an action for yourself. And I'm just going to stop sharing just for a moment and check out the chat and the Q&A. Brilliant. So lots of 3s. So they're the definitions. They're the ones you could define. So you could define 3 of them. I'm guessing the one you couldn't define or define a bit more difficultly would probably be the self-efficacy ones, the one that most people haven't heard of. Excellent. I'm going to leave a moment for any more questions just before I go on to the routines. Yes, Sue, the resilience to Weebles. Let me see if this works. So, for anyone who hasn't seen a Weeble, that's a 1970s Weeble. And anyone who's wondering what the hell it is, like that's the whole game. It has a weight in the bottom, and when you wobble it, it wobbles and then it pops back up again. And I carry a Weeble around with me all the time when I'm working, to remind people that the best thing that we can do as leaders is create Weebles. And it's not the most sophisticated in metaphor, but if we remember all we have to do is resource ourselves up, then it means we can wobble and not fall down. Brilliant. Yeah, Jack, you are, without even knowing what organization you work for, the fact that you're in this industry, you should value what you do enormously. The things that you do create memories that people talk to their kids and their grandkids about. And I don't, whether you're in a brewery, whether you're in a hotel, whether you're in motorway services, you're part of an industry that creates experiences. And I make no apologies for sounding a bit twee with that. So you should value your abilities incredibly highly. And it's a great thing to do. And it's a lovely link back onto the practices, because there's some really simple practices that we can do to ensure that we keep these 4 things at a position which is useful for us. So here they are. So learn something new. By learning something new, especially if it's something that you can learn in quite a short period of time, but there is a degree of challenge in it, you are reminding yourself of your self-efficacy. By learning something new, you are very overtly showing yourself that you can learn and you can grow. So again, in the midst of, this isn't a sob story because I know you're going through incredible challenges, but in the midst of, homeschooling, losing someone really close to us, our uncertainty about our business, our uncertainty about, all of the things that you're dealing with. One of the things that we decided to do was get, I think it's Hello Fresh, which is where you get all the ingredients delivered to you and you make up the meals, but it's really easy to do. Because we didn't want to put ourselves in a massive challenge because we felt like we had enough stuff on our plate. But we wanted to do something where we were completing a task. And it was a really simple way to take care of that first thing. So learn something new, preferably in a short period of time that has a small degree of challenge in it, and that will help to boost or reinforce or reconfirm your self-efficacy. Next up, reflecting on something positive that you've done to help others, whether that's family, friends, colleagues, the people who work for you, that reinforces your self-esteem. You have to have value for yourself when you spend time thinking about the good stuff you do for other people. I notice in my circle of, like my social circle in particular, I notice a gender difference between people's ability to do that. Now, it's a very small sample size, and I may be wrong. It might just be the lenses that I'm looking through. I'm acutely aware of my the position that I'm in and the biases that I have, my lack ability to talk about diversity. I'm a a middle-aged straight white man, and that limits me. I know that, but I look and I see in general in my social circle, males tend to find it easier to go, yeah, I've helped people and I've helped this person and I've done that and done that, and females don't, in my view, don't give themselves enough credit for the degree to which they help other people. Now, it's a small sample size, it might just be what I'm saying, but I guess my offer is that might be you. Give yourself more credit. Third thing, reflecting on what you're brilliant at already, because again, it reinforces your self-esteem. But what you'll also notice if you reflect on the things that you are brilliant at, you'll probably notice that you weren't always brilliant at them. You learn to be brilliant at them, so it also reinforces your self-efficacy. So don't be shy about it. Think about things that you're brilliant at. And even if they're small things, even if they're quirky things and they're unique things, there are things that you are better at than anybody else. 4, think about times when you've overcome significant challenges. By nature, forces you to acknowledge that you're resilient. When you're doing this, I'd really encourage you to spend more time thinking about the overcoming of the challenges rather than the challenge itself. Otherwise, it can become quite a negative and draining activity. But think about things that you've overcome, how you overcame them, how well you felt afterwards, and how able you were to contribute afterwards. Again, it reinforces that sense of resilience. It gives you a greater weight in the bottom. And then finally, think of times when you are genuinely confident. Thinking of times when you are genuinely confident and knowing what do you focus on in here, what words and phrases, what language do you use, and thinking about what your physiology was at those moments. It allows you to very consciously to be able to replicate those things at times when you might need to be able to access your confidence. So, 5 practices. I know some of you are really incredibly busy in different ways. I know some of you might not have done anything like this before and might feel uncomfortable with it. My recommendation is little and often. I would rather people were looking at this and thinking, right, it would be helpful for me to spend a bit of time, for example, boosting my resilience right now. I'd rather you spend 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week, thinking about times you overcome challenges and what you could learn from it, than trying to make it a big project that you do in one go. So my recommendation with any of these, and as I say, I work with a lot of sportsmen as well as business people, my recommendations always little and often. Building habits to embed these into your general routines means that you're able to do it more unconsciously when you go back to work, for those of you who are in a different pattern. So let me again check the questions. So Michael, with all the uncertainty facing us, it is tough to consider self-efficacy without direction ahead. Yeah, this is interesting. I've had this conversation, a similar conversation to this with some school teachers, actually, and some heads. And it is incredibly difficult. But this is why, in such a short period, I'm sharing these 2 almost separate models, although they fit together. It's easier for us to think about the ways that we can overcome challenges when we've given ourselves an initial, if you like, boost of certainty and boost of direction. So if for example, if I was working with this, I'd be saying, okay, making sure you work into really good routines at the beginning and end of every day over a period of, let's say, 5 days. Make sure you're doing that, even if you're not already. Making sure you're setting yourself regular short-term goals that you can see you meet. Not about, delivering parts of the business or anything, but short-term goals. Even we started off doing a big family vision at the beginning of all of this stuff about how we were going to be and what we were going to be like at the end of it. And it's brilliant. And I've got it up on the wall at home, but it feels right now a bit insignificant. What's much more important is when we sit down at breakfast time and go, how we're going to be today. So those kind of short-term goals give us that boost of certainty and direction. Then we can sit down and go, right, what are the ways that I can be sure that I can learn and that I can grow? What's the last thing that I've learned that I was able to apply? When was the last time I changed direction in my career? And what were the things that I did during then? Because it reinforces, even for those of you who might be genuinely concerned about, you know, where your organization's going, it at least reinforces that you have overcome challenges like that before, even if they weren't as great. You can do it, and that increases the likelihood that you'll be able to do it again. It's challenging though. It's challenging. Catherine, great question. How does motivation level impact on the critical four? So again, I'm going to talk about what I think is the experience now rather than in the old normal. For a lot of people, motivation is about getting out of bed, making the right food, getting the work done, you know, logging on and getting through the emails rather than a kind of broader sense of motivation. And again, that's why I think those three critical needs first allow you to have the resources to be able to spend some time reflecting on the critical four. So I think some answer to the question is I think it does, but just making sure that you have that sense of certainty, sense of direction, sense of empowerment individually gives enough of a boost to then be able to go, right, I'm now going to spend some time thinking about, you know, again, my own resilience or my own confidence. So it does impact it, but there's a way to do it even in this short term. If you were talking in normal times, it would be a slightly different answer. Michael, yeah, flexibility. I am. So actually, we're going to talk on I think on the third of these sessions about a little bit about how strategy and culture fit together in organizations. So most of my work over the previous 12 months has actually been with senior teams aligning strategy, culture, and brand and how they fit together. That's really what I've been most passionate about, because most organizations don't do it right. They don't link their culture and their strategy together. Right now, you're right. The time frames are shorter and shorter and shorter for most people. No, and there may be people on here that doesn't apply to. I was talking to an agronomy organization last week. I'm going to speak to them this week. They're working fairly normally. Agronomists don't need to be that socially distant because they are most of the time anyway. So for them, it's business as usual. But for most of us, people who've just been furloughed or have got furloughed teams, that time shortening the time frame is really, really valuable. Okay, let me move on to an extra insight, which I can only best describe as, I think, a bit of spice that you can sprinkle over the top of this, or it's an extra boost for when you need it. And maybe it speaks a little bit to Catherine's question about energy and motivation. One of the most important things that most of us can do now as a simple self-leadership, personal influence, and well-being exercise is to notice our own thinking. So let me explain this just a little bit more. I did a TED talk a TEDx a few years ago, and I asked this question at the beginning. It was meant to be a rhetorical question, which was, how many thoughts do you have in a day? And somebody right in the front row immediately went, 80,000. And to this day, I don't know if they'd made it up or if there was some expert, but I've always used that as the measure from now. So let's say we have 80,000 thoughts a day, and I want you to imagine these thoughts go through, like stream through your head, and you notice some of them, and you dwell on some of them, and you don't notice some of them, and they flip in and out. Our experience, moment to moment, is enormously impacted by the thoughts that we have that we spend most time on. So I want you to imagine as the stream's going by, that we grab clusters of our thoughts and we almost shine a torch on them, And that becomes our experience at that time. Now, this isn't just psychology. There's some neuroscience around this. So for example, our brains don't differentiate between what's real and what's strongly imagined very well. So those of you who, most of you will have had a nightmare at some point, and you wake up and your heart rate's up, and your breathing's normally elevated, and your body temperature's up, and you might have kind of woken up with a jump and push the covers off or whatever. That's because the same physiological reaction happens even though we've just imagined something as if it's happened for real. And actually, our brain doesn't really distinguish between a memory, something that we're imagining in the future, or something that we're experiencing live. Most experiences, imaginations, and memories, the same parts of the brain are working. So that means on a daily basis, and especially times now where there are lots of thoughts happening, there's a lot going on, the thoughts that we spend more time on become our experience. They influence how we feel moment to moment to moment, and they also influence the lenses that we're seeing the world through. So the thoughts that we spend time on start to guide what we notice more in the world. And what I'm not going to say is that some thoughts are good and some thoughts are bad, or some thoughts are positive or some thoughts are negative. For me, it's understanding that some thoughts that we have are more helpful and some are less helpful. So again, just to try and give a real life example, which is kind of authentic to me, for most people, the fact that the furlough scheme was extended last week was fantastic. That's brilliant. And for this industry, I understand it's amazing. So we're in one of these small organizations, small number of organizations that don't really benefit from it. I could furlough myself, but I couldn't do any work. So it doesn't affect me in that way. What it did remind me of was the fact that if they're extending the furlough scheme, it probably means this sector is going to need it for longer. And that put me in a less than resourceful place for a while. And it wasn't conscious. I was just, Joanne, my wife was like, oh, what's the matter? Oh, they've extended the furlough scheme. Oh, that's good, right? I was like, meh. And I should have been pleased about it, but because I was focusing on a certain set of thoughts, I just wasn't as resourceful, and I couldn't be creative, and I couldn't do the work that I was meaning to do. And it wasn't about flipping it to a more positive thought. When I just focused on something else, I was then able to get myself into a more resourceful place. And I use that as a purposeful example because the input, the live news was probably good. It was how I was filtering it and what I was paying attention to. So again, make it another practice that you take away from this. Whether you're comfortable with it or not, whether it's something you normally do or not, I'd encourage you, number one, for the next week, notice the thoughts that you're spending most time on. And then secondly, notice whether they are helpful, like whether they're making you feel better, whether they're resourcing you up, whether they're allowing you to work better, or whether you interact with your kids better or your partners better, or whether they are less helpful, whether you're bringing you down and making you less resourceful. And then you can decide what you do with it. It's a simple exercise, but it's a powerful one. So let me just take one more look at the Q&A and the chat before I start wrapping this up. And the WIHTL guys, if I've missed anything, then please let me know as well.
There is a very good question from Jason in the Q&A. Yeah,
so is this, I really like the strategy alignment culture concept is fundamental. I need to reflect how I can support culture and flex. Yeah, so we are going to come on to that. Jason, if you want it, I'm going to give my contact details. If you need an answer to that before the next couple of weeks, then email me and I'll happily have the conversation. Okay, I'm going to say this again next week. I'm a huge fan of visions generally, and especially distinguishing between visions and strategic goals. But one of the things I'm going to share next week, and I'll say now, is I think the single most important thing we can do now with a team, when we're able to interact with them, is create a vision of how we're going to be now. So nothing about what we're going to achieve, what we're going to deliver, but how are we going to be for each other now? And I think if you were to do that, Jason, again, without knowing your organization and your context, for most people I'm speaking to, that's the most powerful thing that we can do now. And even for teams who are furloughed, getting together on something like this, making it reasonably informal, but just saying, look, how are we going to be for each other? And in particular, how are we going to be knowing that we're all having different experiences? How are we going to show up for each other even when we're not in the room? I think if you can do that, that's as good a culture creation as most people will want or can do right now. Okay, any advices on how being confident, even if you wouldn't say what you have to? Okay, I'm gonna point back to the same thing with confidence, and again, okay, let me frame this in a slightly different way. I got us to write a book on confidence, I think 5 years ago now. It was a really brilliant thing to do, and I was really excited about it. And they said, we need to have 50 chapters. So it's had a couple of different names, but it's the 50 Secrets of Self-Confidence. And I was like, I've got a problem because there's really only one secret that you need to know. So it became the book where I just wrote about everything I knew about, because the secret of confidence is in the first thing. Confidence is a state. All any of us ever need to be as confident as we want in any situation is to get really good at knowing what we do inside our heads, focus-wise, what we do with our body and what we do with our language at the times when we are naturally confident. And if we know what we do physiologically, focus-wise and language-wise at those times, and then replicate them at times when we aren't accessing our natural confidence, you will be as confident as you want in any situation. I absolutely guarantee it. I could give you thousands of examples, but it has to be a practice. That's all it is. Again, make this a 5 minutes a day, every day. Think of times when you feel naturally confident. What we do inside your head, what we're doing with your body, what we're doing with your language, and you'll replicate them all the time. I'm conscious I need to wrap up. Let me share my contact details for anybody who wants any more information or whose questions I might not have been able to answer there. And I guess as I'm sharing this, I just want to wrap up by saying, by practicing this stuff, you've got all of the resources that you need to get through all of the challenges that you are facing right now, pretty much whatever they are. And I can say that sincerely because I've used this stuff over the last couple of weeks and I've needed it. And I'd also like to say that your identity doesn't rest on your role. I know it's important to you because you wouldn't be in the industry that you're in, but your identity and your well-being doesn't rest on the job that you do or the role that you're in. You will get through this no matter what comes over the coming weeks and months, because you've got the resources to do that. And even though it's the most challenging time, we are at the point where it is about to start getting better. So I'd encourage you to do the practices. If any of you've got any questions in the meantime, drop me an email or give me a shout, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Tia, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for all of the little nuggets that you have shared with us and with the audience. I'll just say a couple of words, because I know that people are dropping off and need to go. It's at the end of the session. We look forward to seeing you on next Tuesday, 26th of May, same time, at 10 a.m. for the Transparent Leader. Give us feedback, drop us an email. We'll send you a form to give us feedback so that we can make sure that we take your considerations and thoughts and perspectives on board. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you all hopefully next week.